Hello, Narinder, can you?
Hello. Yeah, can you hear me?
Sorry about, yes, I can. I wasn't able to let you in for some reason. So you can see me, I can
I
see
can
you.
see you.
Oh, so we've got some comments coming through. Can everybody see both of us now? I'm sorry about that blip there.
I think they can.
Just seeing some of the comments coming through. Great. Okay, so yeah, I think everybody can see us properly now. Sandra, you're seeing more than just wood, aren't you? Because I think before I had it angled wrong. So everybody can see us. Fantastic. Okay, well, here we are, Narinder, for our
How are you?
conversation with. I'm fine, I'm good. It's quite hot and muggy day, but how are you?
I'm good. I'm
Think
good.
about doing this.
I just had a few days off, recharging, and getting ready for a lovely conversation with you.
I've just seen one of the little questions, Narinder. It said, yes, Narinder looks great. It doesn't say Kate and Narinder look great. It just says Narinder look great.
You look great. You always look great.
Oh, anyway, so yes, we're here. So for the people who are just starting to join us, I think the numbers are just starting to come up now. So welcome to everybody. Sorry about my initial problem with connecting. My name's Kate. I'm the director of The Big Draw, and I am very excited to be here today with, and I was going to say with one of our favourite patrons, but I'm not allowed to say that. with one of our lovely patrons, Narinder, who is one of those sorts of patrons that actually does loads of, is very proactive and very collaborative, and is a good friend as well. And I am honoured, and it's a privilege to be here in this space together and with all of you. So thank you for coming along to join us. It's going to be very informal.
Good.
We're just going to sort of do it as a sort of an in conversation with. I've got a few little notes here. I have also got my sketchbook. I mean, Narinder's got all of his stuff, obviously, but I've got all my gear as well. So I can do a little bit of sketching while we're talking. But there's a few things I'd hope to cover as we go through. You know, we can maybe ask Narinder a little bit about his journey to where he got to, but also well-being, what drawing means to Narinder. And hopefully I can pick up on some of the questions as they're coming through. They come through very quickly, and it's not always easy to talk and read them at the same time, as I've discovered last time I did this, but I will try my best to pick up on some of the questions. We're probably going to aim for about 40 minutes. Does that sound about right, Narinder?
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I try and keep an eye on the time. It's 6:34 now, so if we aim to finish by around the latest quarter past, that's probably about right. I did run over slightly last time, but I think it just depends on if the flow is going. We'll just probably keep talking.
Keep talking.
Yeah. So welcome everybody, and I'd just like to hand over to Narinder so that he can introduce himself properly.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. It's good to have lots of company. Actually, I find Instagram quite amazing because you always feel connected with people through social media, and at the same time, you know, it's wonderful to share what we're doing from often the loneliness of our rooms whilst we're in lockdown, but also it's wonderful to be inspired by so many people. And it's interesting that we're going to have a conversation, and we can almost talk about drawing without showing any drawings at all, because I think you know, drawing is about conversation, and I think that's going to be our topic today. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Narinder Sagoo. I'm a senior partner. I've trained as an architect, and I've become an artist, if you like, over the course of my life. I think I've been very fortunate to find architecture a field in which drawing and making comes together, and for me, kind of creativity has become my profession. So, and the core of that is obviously my passion and love of drawing.
Yes. And I think, Narinder, I think you've been a patron for a few years now. One of the reasons that we were very keen to thread Narinder into the fold was that for those of you who know the Big Draw, we think very much about drawing as a language, as a tool for visual communication. So whilst yes, it can be about more traditional drawing, it can just as easily be about how drawing, how visual thinking, how mark making, how that underpins a whole range of different professional practices. And I think maybe one of the more obvious one, of course, is architecture, and how architects, engineers, designers, how they use that to communicate to each other, but also to communicate the ideas externally as well. So
Yeah.
we were delighted when, of course, Narinder said yes to come and join us. But we wanted to start to unpick a little bit around that and about what drawing means. I think what drawing means for you, Narinder, on a personal level, in your job, what drawing means in terms
Yeah.
of how it helps you communicate with clients,
Yeah.
but also, what it means for you as an artist, as an individual, in being able to explore how you're feeling, what's going on. I mean, particularly, during lockdown is a good example, actually, about how it's helped you during lockdown.
Yeah. Well, I've always found I grew up in Leeds, and we didn't really venture very far from where we lived. And drawing for me was escaping from boredom, escaping from reading and writing, and a way of looking at the world around me, a way of exploring, a way of seeing how things work. It was, I grew up and I didn't realize at the time how creative my family was. I wouldn't really have discovered the word creativity until much later in life, and discovered how much creativity embeds itself within so many different professions. But making of all sorts was kind of really important in my childhood. My father was using chalk to draw on metal before he would cut it. My grandfather was a carpenter and would draw on wood and saw it. And my mother and grandmother were seamstresses, and they would use the same chalk, actually, interestingly, on fabric. So drawing and making was a big part for me.
I remember when I met your mother and we talked about sewing and embroidery.
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
yeah. She still draws, and and we're from a very creative background, very kind of hardworking as well. And so, and then I think I wasn't academically as bright as I would have liked to have been at school, but I used drawing as a way of finding interest in subjects, falling in love with sciences and geography and even maths to some degree through drawing. And so I was able to start to, I guess, illustrate the way things should be explained through words and conversation or writing or formula. And I found the easiest thing for me to do was just to draw it. And then I guess, and I don't remember too many people kind of drawing, recreationally in the family, but I remember people doing those kind of drawings, which are, giving, before we had Google Maps, we used to have A to Z books, and people would kind of get a back of an envelope and a pencil or a pen and draw parallel lines for a road and little circles for traffic lights and draw maps for one another. And what I still find fascinating about that is that that was kind of somebody drawing as a way of giving instructions, giving direction, and it was a combination of speaking whilst drawing. They would speak the directions whilst drawing the little map, and really, I find that's still what I do. I mean, I'm turning complex ideas and thoughts and explorations into drawings that everyone can understand, not just within the practice, but externally with our clients as well. And the interesting thing is, my favorite drawings are the ones which are in conversation. I mean, I'm looking at one here, which I don't know if you can see, but is a typical page of explaining to someone and listening to ideas, listening to a few people simultaneously, and thinking of ways of describing a project. And I guess, going back to the kind of lockdown, the thing I miss the most are people. I miss my team. I miss fantastic brains and minds and thinking, and that kind of creative serendipity that we have in the studio. I miss that around me when I'm at home. So I've had to try to find ways of working and try to create an environment and try to inspire myself whilst being at home on lockdown.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on a couple of the things that you just said. So I love that phrase when you were talking about being at school and that whole thing about falling in love with maths and science. They weren't they weren't necessarily your natural allies at school.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, it's something that I find myself doing a lot because obviously I've got, well, for people who are on the call won't know, I have two girls who Narinder has seen on the Zoom call. They're a bit crazy. They're 9 and 10, and obviously on lockdown and trying to homeschool and everything at the same time, particularly with maths. And I was lucky; I was quite good at maths at school. But with them, when they're struggling a little bit with fractions or whatever it might be, I find drawing it out, drawing the diagrams out, drawing out the measures, drawing the equation out even. It for me, it's how I learn, it's how I made sense of it. And you can see that they immediately sort of go, oh, okay. It's taking it from the written word, the written language, which doesn't always click for some people. The penny just doesn't drop. And then you draw, but as soon as you draw it, they're like, oh yeah, that makes loads of sense. Of course it's that. And they're not brilliant drawings. I mean, this is one thing to say to people on the call is that, I mean, certainly at the big draw, we're not talking about, well, it could be, but a lot of the time we're using drawing as a tool to communicate, to explore thinking, ideas, to document a transition or a process. It doesn't have to all be about the end result. It doesn't have to be about a pretty picture. And this whole idea that you hear people saying all the time is, oh, I can't draw.
Yeah.
Well, what do we mean by drawing? So obviously we're talking about drawing in terms of making those marks with meaning and communicating those ideas. So I think that's really interesting.
I think, I mean, for us,
more of
within
that,
the
personally, I wish they would.
I mean, I always say to people, if you don't know what to draw, or if you're hesitant in any way, draw whilst talking to somebody. You can talk to anybody. In fact, it doesn't have to be anyone with a trained vocabulary in architecture or design or art. You should be able to describe anything through drawing with anyone. And we use drawing, I think, when it's absolutely the most powerful. We use it when we're asking questions. And in fact, this week, in the last few weeks, I've been doing drawings which in themselves are quite interesting, inspired by kind of cartoonists and so on. And these are a series of drawings that explain the way we work in the practice. And this one here is saying, question everything, even the question. And it's funny because we use drawing to question the obvious, and as Norman always says, never take the obvious for granted and stay curious. I guess I was always a student in the classroom who didn't get it, and I would put my hand up, terrified that I would kind of be laughed at, and ask the really, really obvious questions, and sometimes just say, "I'm really sorry, but I don't understand." But then I realized over time that everyone else in the classroom was thinking exactly the same thing. They were just too afraid to ask.
You know what? They probably were. I was going to say, everybody was thinking the same thing, but either they weren't interested, they couldn't be bothered, or they didn't have the courage to put their hand up and ask. I think that's
So
thing.
In a way, for me, I think about that quite often, because in architecture, in the practice, there can be too many people in the room or within the project team who kind of do take things for granted and don't ask questions. But drawing's a very powerful way, and quite an intelligent way at the same time to ask those questions and kind of get across quite simple ideas.
Very quickly as well.
Yeah, and within a very intelligent environment sometimes where you can be really terrified to ask those questions because you assume that you should know the answer.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think I've said to you increasingly, certainly in my role, I often find myself sat around the table with sort of creative people from all different disciplines. And I mean, certainly I take my notes in doodle, sort of drawing, scribbly form. That's just how I remember things. But I'm increasingly going, well, obviously not the last few months, but before that. And people would similarly take their notes in scribbles or doodles, or increasingly there would be just a piece of paper in the middle and we'd all draw our notes. It would be like written notes, but that sort of intersection between words, drawing, doodles, scribbles, that sort of place in the centre. But it meant something to the people on that meeting, and for us on that, if you're in that meeting, you remember it. And then we wouldn't do notes, we wouldn't have to follow up with written minutes. We'd just take a photograph on the iPad and send the photograph of the drawings, and that's the minute. You remember, don't you? Just before I forget, there's a couple of questions here that I think are quite nice that if you're willing to have a go at. So the first one is, it's quite a difficult one, is can you describe a day in the life of your job at Foster's? I imagine it's very varied, but are you able?
yeah, well, yeah, I'd love to. We start well we in the physical office.
That's probably
in the world we're in today, we've tried to replicate exactly how we worked before. And I mean, we always think, you're only as good as your team. If I was to step away, if anyone was to step away from the incredible team that we're in, you realize that you start to, you're no longer inspired by those great minds. You no longer have that creative serendipity. You're no longer kind of able to support one another and have that empathy in the workplace. So we normally start the day having breakfast together, and we chat about what we did last night, and what we're interested in, what films we've watched, and so on. So we start the day as friends, which is really, really important.
Yeah.
And therefore you connect as people, you connect as colleagues as well as friends. You develop a mutual respect where there's no real hierarchy that's enforced by the working environment. You just realize that you're all friends. And so we do exactly the same thing on Microsoft Teams. We press the button at 9 o'clock every morning and we catch up for a good half an hour. And then we leave the call going all day long. And we just talk to each other whenever we want to. So I could just say Kate at any time during the day and you're listening. And then, it's interesting what you said about kind of drawing with one another. In the digital world, I find that we can do it even more, because when you're drawing around a sketchbook like this, there's only so many people who can surround the sketchbook.
Yeah.
And with the iPad, for example, or even a camera on a sketchbook, you can just have 100 people in a meeting.
Yeah.
And what I found more so, I mean, it took me quite a while within the professional environment, I think, of years and years and years of drawing, in my own time and being in my own private comfort zone, but even within the practice. It took me quite a while to be able to draw in front of people. But as soon as I did, and it was just addictive. It was just a really wonderful situation, because you realize how powerful it can be, and that other people are, more worried about drawing in front of a crowd or in front of a group.
I mean, we hear that a lot as well at the big draw. Again, the fear of the empty page. It's a big thing, isn't it? It is it's a really big deal, and I think we hear it more from adults than children. I think that children are a little bit more free and able to have a go. But yeah, we do find that a lot when we're out and about at events and everything. That initial, and it's almost like once they've got over that initial fear and barrier of just having a go, but certainly we're not nobody's expecting them to produce some sort of beautiful, I don't know, aesthetically pleasing drawing. That it's for them, and I think once they've got that in their head, they will sit there, and you can see that they go to a different place. I mean, I know people talk about this. I think I talked about this in the last one I did with Wilson from Reba. This idea of getting into flow, into a state of flow, and I think it's that place when you're drawing, you're sketching, and I mean, I get it when I'm knitting as well, or sewing, which is actually, again, it's very haptic. It's very I'm doing something with my hands. I'm just getting into the flow.
Well, it's kind of like I always find the hardest page in a sketchbook is always the first page.
It's always the first page, yeah.
And I still find that. And it's the same feeling that you have when you're in a meeting and you're wondering whether to draw or not, or when you're in conversation and you're wondering whether to draw or not, because you think you might get it wrong, and you think, but really there's no such thing as a mistake, as we always say.
Yes.
And if you're in conversation and the lines are following a conversation, it makes it much, much easier. I mean, sometimes I haven't done in this book, but sometimes I miss out the first page and just carry on drawing on.
It's daunting to go to the second page.
Yeah, you just and think, well, and there's a fear of always kind of needing to draw wonderful things in every sketchbook.
Yeah, but what does wonderful even mean? I mean, I can't excuse myself by saying, oh, I'm an architect, I'm an artist. You know, I can't. I go into meetings and I suddenly, people generally don't, but sometimes they do, and they'll go, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, sorry, I should have said, I'm just making my notes. I'm just doodling, but don't worry, I'm listening to you. I really am. This is just how I remember things. Like, okay. You know, so
actually, I mean, it shows that you're listening if you've got a pen in your hand and you're you know, and in an interesting way, I've always wanted to, and maybe I have in some ways over the years, but I always used to kind of watch secretarial staff and how they used to write in shorthand, which is just kind of almost like a little hieroglyphic language to make notes very, very quickly. I guess you could use a dictaphone, but if you're writing and you're watching, if you're looking at someone in the eye and writing at the same time, secretarial staff used to use shorthand. So I wondered if there was a drawing method that was like shorthand, where you could and there's another interesting thing. So if you're drawing in conversation, you're forced to draw. But if you're drawing whilst listening, you're making really quick marks, and you're making the necessary amount of marks that are needed to remember that conversation.
Yeah.
So when we talk about drawing as a language, I think that when you're in conversation, if you have a lot of time, you could talk at great depth, or if you're giving a lecture, you could prepare for it and show quite complex images and drawings that you've produced beforehand. If you're drawing in conversation, you only draw as much as you need to draw. So you only say as much as you need to say, if you like. And it makes you very, very efficient. And I think it's a great way of practicing the skill of drawing simple drawings, which I think are much, much harder to do than complex drawings.
I think there's an authenticity, isn't there, to it? That you just don't get. And you don't get the nuances in quite the same way. And I know everyone learns and remembers differently, but I think there is a huge swathe of people out there, obviously like people like us, but maybe people watching as well, that they do it really is sometimes, it is literally just a squiggle sometimes. But that squiggle, that's probably encapsulating 20 minutes of something that happened at a meeting. But I know that and I remember it in that way.
Yeah.
For me, it means that. It means something. There's another question here, Narinder, that's quite an interesting one. They're coming through thick and fast. I'm afraid I can't keep
Good.
up.
Let's
answer some
questions.
Coming out for you, I can see. There's quite a few people that have said they do that. They miss the first page as well. Yeah, it's obviously a thing. There's a question here that is interesting, which is, the question was, what was it that encouraged you to do architecture over fine art? Now, I don't know if that ever was
Right.
a either or for you, but I can see that
Yeah.
may have been a you know, that way for you, and
Yeah.
what it was that made you go
Well,
over another.
it's interesting. I think it's also quite a complex um, kind of answer in a way, because we've all been um, on different paths. But for me, when I was choosing my GCSEs, art wasn't really an option, even though I had a love of drawing. And the decision making, and this is where, the larger conversation of STEAM versus STEM,
Yeah.
which is more important now than ever before, and particularly when we're talking about diversity within architecture, and more BAME members of the architectural community, because I wasn't allowed to choose art, even though I was passionate about it. I loved it more than anything. Because of the configuration of subjects, I couldn't do it. And I did graphic communication,
Yeah.
which was a subject at the time. And I did engineering drawing, which was far more technical, taking engine parts and learning how to draw in perspective and isometric and so on. I was the only student studying engineering drawing. And when I got to A level, I still couldn't do art because, of course, I hadn't been given the option at GCSE. And so I did engineering drawing and graphic communication at A level as well. And I did it on my own. So I would sit these 4 or 5 hour exams doing that. So I was driven away from fine art. I think I would have loved to have done fine art, perhaps, or another kind of a creative degree. Added to that, and I think this is really, really poignant right now when we're talking about diversity, within certain cultures, art is not seen as a credible profession, if you like. And so I was very lucky that I was never discouraged by my immediate family from studying art. But I found architecture was the perfect answer because it was a profession. It sounded like the right kind of degree for the family. But again, for me, it was absolutely perfect because it combined making, which was quite rich in the family, and drawing and creativity. I think that's really what led me in that direction. And I mean, today I think we 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 need to be quite careful with the choices that our children make at school, and make sure that they are fully supported in arts, and fully supported in, like we were saying earlier as well, perhaps just using art and drawing, combining it with all the other subjects, and making sure it feeds through to everything we do. So in the same way we learn to read and write, we should learn to draw. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
I,
I mean, Narinder knows that. I mean, so I mean, at the Big Draw, we do this. We champion this all the time, and we're on a number of sort of national-facing groups, working groups around this. But yeah, I mean, I could just get on my soapbox about this. It's not embedded. It's not. There is not parity between the subjects, and I could just rant on, and I need to rein myself in. But there's a lot more work to be done.
yeah.
There's a new initiative that came out recently. I don't know if you all saw it. That's looking to really champion this, led by a number of the universities. So I don't know. Let's hope that.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think we mustn't stop, and I think
No.
right now, when we're trying to increase the amount of diversity in architecture, for example, it all goes back to those days where, um, you know, um, children are told that they should choose, medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, finance over a project, a direction in art. And if we allow them choices at that stage, I think, I mean, we can't really change the industry as it is. I know we started talking about diversity, but it is really important. We need to go back to school and change the generation that's ahead of us, I think they're the real, that's where
We
the real
do,
change is
and
going
we're
to be.
going, and we're pushing back. I mean, I had a similar story. I mean, I was disencouraged as well from art subject.
Mm.
I wanted to do art at A level, and I wasn't allowed. I had to take maths and other
Yeah.
get pushed down a certain route, and we hear it all the time. It's just so common, and it's weird that nothing really changes that much.
Mm.
It's so bizarre, and I do think there's a big job to be done actually, and I mean this with no disrespect to other parents, but I think there's almost like a campaign to be done with parents to encourage them to feel that actually going into creative industry, cultural sector type roles is a viable career option for their children. It genuinely is. They will have, number one, they will be able to make some money, they will survive, but they'll also be able to be creative and they'll feel fulfilled. And let's not underestimate that as well. I mean, it does worry me the way that there's been a push towards monetizing, with the current administration, saying, well, if you do X degree or this degree or this degree, you're more likely to earn this much to give back to the economy. That does really worry me. So it's getting that message over, because very often, like you were just pertaining to, it's not the young person at 15, 16 that gets to make the decision. It's the influence from their parents saying, actually, I don't think those subjects are going to get you anywhere. You need to do X, Y, and Z. And if you've got that pressure at home, you're gonna do it.
I think you also need to be self-determined, I think, and not let people put you off. I think I think having self-affirmations daily within your life and within your career is really important. Telling yourself that you can do something regardless of what the mainstream industry is telling you to do, or you can't achieve something by a certain age, or you'll never work with somebody, or never get this project or get that project. I think you've always got to swim at your own pace and in your own direction. But if you don't take everyone along with you, if you don't do it as a team, then you're sure to fail. So the challenge is really kind of being persistent with your goals, but take your team along. But also, I find the same way that I was encouraged to draw when I was a child. I'm lucky that I'm in a working environment where I'm supported. I've been supported for over 2 decades in what I do and in what I love doing. I mean, I'm very, very lucky to work with Norman. I'm very, very lucky to work with some incredible architects, designers, and creatives in the office who've all supported me. There's never been anyone within our practice that would turn away any kind of talent. And our challenge, part of my job at the moment is to always look for great ideas, always to look for new skills, new ways of doing things, and support them, encourage them. So the great ideas don't necessarily come from me. They don't always come from Norman or any of the senior members of staff. It's looking for that passion and that love of creativity within people. So I've been very lucky that I've been able to do that. One of the questions was how to get good at architectural drawing.
Yeah, so I should say that. So there's a question on my architecture.
Yeah, I mean, if you saw the drawings that I did when I joined the practice, they weren't great. I couldn't draw people. I couldn't really understand perspective fully, even though I'd kind of tried it in a technical manner. But to draw in perspective, freehand, without anything as a guide, was very, very difficult. But the people around me encouraged me. The people around me gave me the time, gave me the space, and still do, to just do more of it. And there's no clear answer with how to get better at drawing than just to practice. You have to just constantly practice, and you will certainly improve. The other thing is, like we were saying earlier, don't take anything for granted, including your own skill, including your own abilities. And try new techniques, try different ways of drawing, switch tools, work with analog versus digital. So you can, I recently discovered in the last year or so drawing with these Lamy pens, these ink pens. But I switch between, the Apple Pencil and the fountain pen all the time. But then when I find the muscle memory kind of taking over, I'll look for something really quite unconventional. So I remember somebody saying to me, "Have you ever drawn with the back of a spoon?" And so I was using the back of a wooden spoon and dipping it in ink and making marks and drawing in that way. And it takes you back to the point, I guess, it's really interesting. It takes switching tools and starting to draw with something and making marks with something that you're not used to. It takes you back to the point where your brain's telling you can't do it. You're not familiar with it.
It's very playful, it's very exploratory, it's very childlike, where you're up for materials and making things and trying new things out.
Yeah, I mean, so over the lockdown, I posted some of these on Instagram, but I've been, trying to draw standing up and draw very, very quickly. So having children is a challenge because they're moving around so quickly all the time.
Yeah.
And if you try to draw them whilst in the park, it's twice as difficult as if you were on your own, because they want to be somewhere else. They don't want to be standing there for hours. So you've got minutes to draw things. And I found these drawings kind of really taking myself out of my comfort zone and being able to find new techniques. Really, yeah. Go on, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you. I have my colleague, lovely Sandra, who's on the call from the team, because they are coming thick and fast with questions. She has put a few in WhatsApp for me. So there's a couple here. If I read you a few out, do you want to choose one?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So I'll just read them all, and then. So the first one is: are you a sketchbook hoarder? We are, certainly, in this house. How long did you go without? How long without drawing, and how have you improved your drawing skills? Any challenges within the digital collaboration in your field?
What was the second one? How long do you?
The second one was: how long did you do without drawing, and how have you improved in your drawing skills? And then the whole digital analog thing. And then a good question, I think, which is one thing you wish you knew or would tell your younger self before studying architecture. So some advice for your younger self.
Yeah, well, I am a sketchbook hoarder.
I think we all are.
Yeah. I've just become.
I know the whole Big Draw team are.
Yeah, I remember in the early days when I was just kind of maybe got onto my 15th drawing for the practice, 20th drawing for the practice. I remember being quite particular at people used to draw with ink and pencil and so on, and rub out and use Tipex to kind of change drawings. And I became obsessed with never using those methods of correcting myself and just carrying on drawing, because I knew one day that would be the skill I need to have.
Right.
So I ended up with kind of lots and lots of original drawings that I just kept and stored. And over time, I think I've probably got about 12,000, 13,000 drawings that are archived. I knew how particular and meticulous Norman was with storing drawings and kind of looking after them. In a way, they're kind of wonderful memories. And it's interesting. I realized going back through some of those drawings recently, and I have some at home. At the time, they're just quick sketches, or they've done in an hour just to get in front of a client or in a presentation. But once those buildings get built, so I see one of the questions here: which is your favorite project? But I really loved working on the Gherkin, 30 St Mary's Axe, because it was something that no one had ever seen before. It was an opportunity to draw something, to create something that would really change the way we see the skyline of London.
Mm.
But those drawings that I did then, and I look back at them and I think, gosh, I was still learning. I really struggled with that drawing. But now that building's built and time has passed, those drawings become super valuable. So I do hoard drawings and I do hoard sketchbooks. And, you know, because I think in a way they're a legacy for my children. You know, they're a wonderful tool to go back in time and go back to individual memories. You know, imagine being able to catalogue and illustrate conversations, going back to kind of these conversational drawings. You could go back and just and see, and often those ideas on paper are not even mine. They're just a collective of ideas, and we share ideas together. I just happen to be the person putting them down. In a way, they start to tell the history of the practice, and they start to tell the history of projects, which I think is really useful.
I think sketchbooks is, certainly from my perspective, the big draw is really interesting because not only with architects, because we work with all different sectors, we see sketchbooks as a real constant across all of those sectors. That, you know, teachers, engineers, project managers, scientists, physicists, a lot of them, well, they might call it a logbook, but if you actually look at a sketchbook, it's really interesting. A lot of disciplines will use it. I'm conscious of the time. I mean, it's 13 minutes past 7, and we said we were going to aim for about 15:15.
Should we keep going for another 10 minutes?
I mean, I'm happy to keep going. If you're happy to keep going, Narinder.
Sure, let's do it.
Let's do it. People on. So, as long as I don't go past 7:30, yeah.
Okay, great.
A couple of the
well, one of the other questions was time off drawing. I don't think I've really had time off drawing. I'm kind of conscious not to. I mean, everyone needs a break. Everyone needs time off, but I rarely disconnect from drawing itself. I think I'm always drawing something, and it's interesting. Even though I said I wasn't very good at English and writing when I was at school, I think because I've been recording conversations for so many years, I've been doing so much listening and turning the listening into drawings. And then when I stopped thinking about how to draw, and I was just purely thinking about what to draw, I was then experienced enough by being in that wonderful environment to have my own voice. I really, really found the power of drawing. Once that happened, I think my language skills improved incredibly, because I was telling my wife, stories of being told to leave the classroom during English, or being able to having to explain why my essay was so bad. If I could go back to school, I would. I think I'd be much better, because I'm able to, now what I do is storyboard conversations like a film storyboarder might do. I would go back and storyboard my essay and my stories that I was writing in English. For me, writing, the point I'm trying to make also is my sketchbooks are not always full of drawings. Sometimes they're pages and pages of writing, and in a funny way, for me, writing has become drawing as well, and drawing has become writing.
Is that blue?
And I remember very clearly I'd annotated some drawings, and Norman said, your drawing and writing are inseparable from one another. And I really, really loved that. I hadn't done it intentionally, but of course, I'm drawing and writing simultaneously. Of course, that's going to happen. So the point I was making was I never have a break from drawing, but if I'm not drawing, I like to write letters. I like to write notes to people, which I think is a lovely thing to do. I like to kind of draw birthday cards for friends and family, and keep drawing alive. One of the questions I saw was how to draw minimal projects, which, like I was saying earlier, is the most difficult thing to do, is to draw the simplest thing. My top tip would be that if drawing is a language, and sometimes we speak very, very quickly, and we say things in passing, sometimes we say it with a bit of wit as a joke or whatever. Sometimes we're very, very serious and we spend a lot of time. If you choose the right tool and you choose the right canvas, you can control the pace of that conversation and the pace of that language. So some of the drawings behind me are 0.1 pen, fiber tip pen on large sheets of tracing paper. And those are very slow conversations. And, you know, they take a lot of time because the canvas is large. If I draw very fast, the nib breaks. So I have to speak and very slowly through the pen. And it slows down my thinking. It makes me think slowly. If I'm drawing something very quick and I want to be able to get it across in very few lines, I will draw smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's a good way of balancing your time as an artist, in the workplace as well. So you don't always have to draw at the same speed. I remember an incredible person that I used to work with when I just finished university. We used to present our projects on slides, and we used to take these carousels of slides to presentations, and then we fit them into a projector and turn the projector on, and we click through on all the slides.
Yeah.
The slides needed to be back to front and upside down, so when they're projected on the wall.
I remember that.
And there was an amazing person, it's actually when I was working on St. Mary's Axe, the Gherkin, and he used to do his diagrams for buildings directly onto blank slides. So you can imagine it's about the size of a postage stamp.
It's tiny.
But you can only draw certain. You can only draw so much on such a small canvas. So you've only got seconds to say something, and only a small amount of real estate to do that on. So that's a good tip. Or sometimes I would, and I still do it. I draw something very small, and once I've captured a thought in my mind or a conversation, and I draw it super small, so I'm really confident whilst getting it onto paper, and then I will either blow it up on a Xerox machine or put it on an iPad and then draw over it in a lot more detail. It's a really clever way, I think, of getting perspective right as well, because it's much easier to do it smaller rather than doing it on a large.
I'm thinking, and maybe we can get a few people putting some comments in to get a straw poll, as it were. But I mean, we knew this, didn't we, Narinder? Because me and Narinder, we should just say to the people on the call that me and Narinder do chat very regularly. We regularly have our little sort of coffee morning.
Yeah. We
could probably talk all day.
All night.
And it strikes me there's a lot there to unpack, and I think if Narinder's interested, I mean, maybe we need to look at a second follow-up session, and maybe
let's
focus specifically on maybe tips, that
technique.
Sort of thing, because
we should.
Time is going by. It's 20 past already. So
let me answer a couple of questions. One was which sketchbooks. I really love moleskins because they're really tough and they don't break, and I do want to keep them forever because I'm a hoarder. So they're lovely paper to draw on. The other one was how did I come up with my style? Really, I think, and you have to be very confident to say this, there's no such thing as your own style, really. You've got so many influences around you. I mean, I've been very lucky. I've had Norman, I've had people like Birkin Howard, Alan Martin, just within our practice. There's an incredible guy called Tom Politovich who drew in very different ways. I'm influenced by people like Quentin Blake because I love the way he moves. I've seen him draw live and sat next to him. The way he moves ink around with a quill, I think is really, really beautiful. And the way he kind of lets the line do what it needs to do and then discover things in those lines, I've been really influenced by. So you start to become, your style becomes everything you've loved of many, many different people. You know, I would still pore over books from Helmut Jacobi and Gordon Cullen and Paul Rudolph and people, the masters of drawing, I think. And so in that spirit, I think if I could go back and tell myself what to do as a student just before I started learning architecture, I would say that I would stay curious, never take the obvious for granted, and keep learning. I think never ever, never ever stop learning, and don't become too confident in yourself that you've achieved your own style.
Mm. As we start to maybe wrap it up, Narinder, I just wanted to thread out a couple of things quickly, because that we really, if I go over, then I'll be in trouble with the team and they'll tell me off.
No problem.
Because I had like a long list, and I think we've covered them. So sketchbooks, blah 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 blah. A couple of things. I mean, obviously we've talked about this separately, but I mean, going back to what in terms of diversity and encouraging people to come to the table and amplifying voices, etc. I mean, do you have any? Is there anything more that you want to say on this, or maybe we can pick it back again? We do a follow up perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I saw an answer there, which I wasn't consciously trying to say, but my influences all there were male, right? And they were of a certain generation. I think we can, like I said before, we can only be responsible for the next generation. It's too late to change my own within the workplace, and we must just look for pure talent and look for pure skill, and regardless of who that person is. I think, like I have, you know, I've kind of been through years and years of discrimination at school, which has probably held me back in so many different ways. I've always kept my identity. I've always celebrated who I am, and it becomes a very powerful tool. I think you should always bring your true self to the workplace and allow other people to do so. My team is incredibly diverse. I mean, it could be more diverse, but I think if I said all those people that, you know, of a certain generation were my influencers, I think there are people in my team like Emma, who's incredible at drawing. We draw together, and she has her own style. She can draw. We can draw together on the same drawing, and you can't tell our styles apart. But she has her own style, which I just love, and I love looking at her drawings. So people that work for you become your inspiration as well. And in that respect, I think we, in the same way that we need to stay innocent and keep learning, I think we need to be quite humble as well about who we are.
I think we're going to have to probably wrap it up there, Narinder. Otherwise, I'm in danger of it not saving, and I will be.
Okay.
So.
Well, let's do it again.
Probably do another one. Everyone's saying we should. So,
yeah, we absolutely should.
So if I can say thank you to everybody on the call. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us and for all the questions. I'm sorry we couldn't answer all of them, but save them for next time, and we'll get a date in the diary, if we may, with Narinder soon. And
let's do that.
Thanks to Narinder. I said to everyone on the call, didn't we? Said we could just keep talking.
Well, thank you to you, Kate, and thanks to Sandra and the team for organising this. We should definitely do it again.
We'll do
Thanks
it soon.
for everyone who's joined. I recognise quite a few names there. Maybe I'll open up some questions and answers on my Instagram and answer some of those extra questions. But this room doesn't feel lonely anymore. It feels great.
Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Narinder. We all love you.
Thank you so much. Take care. All the best.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.